Strategic, Academic, and Innovative Leadership Institute for the State University of New York, and a member of the TS3 Steering Committee. He will kick us off by discussing the theory of change regarding large-scale change efforts. Then Robert Todd, the Director of Policy and Partnership Development at the University System of Georgia, will discuss the role of data in scaling efforts. The University System of Georgia is one of the TS3 High Impact Practices grantees, and he will also discuss this work. There will be ample time for Q&A at the end. We will be doing the Q&A via the chat. If you mouse over the bottom, the black bar at the bottom under the two graduates, you'll see your chat feature. You may also have it at the right in the white column, depending on how your screen is set up. You can enter your questions at any time, and I will be monitoring them for our Q&A portion. If you have any specific questions that you'd need to send just to me, just keep in mind when you type a message, if you're sending it to everyone or to one specific individual. Jason, please get us started.
All right, thanks, Claire. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. We really appreciate your engagement in this important work and thinking about how do we use data for effective scaling. To kick us off and to test your knowledge of Zoom and the chat function, what we want to do first is just ask you a question, and that is, what HIPs are you looking to scale? And so if you could just open the chat function like Claire described and just type in there the type of HIPs that you're focusing on, that would be appreciative and I think would help us get a better sense of the work that you're doing. Great, so we're seeing them fill in here: supplemental learning, learning communities, e-portfolios, first-year experiences, honors programs, civic engagement, internships, study abroad, research experiences, writing intensive courses. Great, keep them coming and rolling in. We'll record those as well, but it's really a great array of activities and engagements that you all are looking at. And so what I'm going to start with today a little bit is talking about shifting mindsets from isolated impact to scaling evidence-based practices. And Robert's going to move us more into the data side of all this and provide some examples of what they're doing at the University System of Georgia. What I'm going to do a little bit is talk about theories of change, and we could spend 3 days talking about theories of change. There's lots of theories, but I think one in particular is useful for us, and that's really thinking about how do we shift the way in which people think about the work that we're doing, and fundamentally shifting the ways in which we go about this work, moving away from isolated impacts to really sort of thinking about this from a more collective perspective. Just for a bit of inspiration, turn to David Leonhardt in a quote from the New York Times, but when he says educating more people and educating them better appears to be the best bet any society can make. I think that systems here are one of the most crucial elements for making this happen. There's no other organizational entity that really has the capacity to leverage large-scale change in a way that can systematically transform the educational enterprise in the United States, which is why we're really focusing on scaling at the system level. But we can also apply some of this to scaling at the institutional level as well. And it's obvious that people are catching on to this idea. There's lots of initiatives out there that are trying to say, let's work together. And how to make all of this happen. The one we are most fond of here, obviously, is TS3. And Claire gave us a great overview of what TS3 is and why we're here together thinking about this. And we've set some national goals. And I think it's important from a context perspective to realize, though, that there's been lots of interest in transforming the completion agenda and really focusing on how do we have more of our population move through post-secondary ed in a way that they can achieve a high quality credential. Unfortunately, despite all the money that has been put into this by foundations like Lumina and Gates and others, and despite all of the leadership we've had through various administrations, about the U.S. becoming first in the world to get an education, we really have barely moved the dial on the completion agenda, and suggesting that the goals that we've set for sort of 2020 or 2025 really won't be reached until decades further unless we can systematically transform what we're doing right now. So what do we mean by scale? Not quite sure how TBR got up there. That's interesting. But what do we mean by scale is essentially looking at, it means different things to different people. And so from a SUNY perspective, scaling looks like this. All across New York State is where SUNY exists, 64 campuses, 600,000 students. But essentially, we're really trying to think about how do we spread out the work that we're doing across all of this. Now, not everybody's going to have scale at the same level or in the same way, but we do know this. Scaling is systematically about change and creating change and engaging in change. And change is hard. Studies that have been done by McKinsey have suggested that over the last 20 years, change happens, about 30% of all change efforts are successful. And by successful, we mean they last over a long period of time. And really fascinated by the TBR thing there. Essentially, U.S. completion rates, though, well, that last slide was supposed to show you that completion rates have not changed very much in the last 10 years, despite all these efforts. And despite all the interventions that we've talked about, many of them that you all have talked about already and put there in the chat box. But essentially, one of the issues that we know from change, it really matters from a change perspective, is changing the way in which people think about different situations. And most notably, I want to introduce this equation, which is from Tim Galloway, who has studied sports and business operations. And he says performance equals potential minus interference. And essentially what he's trying to suggest there is that fundamentally what interferes with our ability to be successful is an internal dialogue that we have at ourselves. And he said he posited that our performance is equal essentially to the potential that we have within ourselves, minus the interference that is really created from self-imposed constraints that come from fear, self-doubt, lapses in focus, eliminating assumptions, or just an ability to not think differently about the world. And one of the best examples of this is somebody you all probably read about very, very recently, and that's Roger Bannister. He's the person there on the left of your slide, but Roger Bannister was the first human to break the 4-minute mile. And why that's important is that before Roger Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, nobody thought it was possible. In fact, there were journal articles that said it was physically impossible for the human body to be able to move fast enough to actually break the 4-minute mile. Now, what's remarkable is after Bannister broke the 4-minute mile, and he did it in the time of 3 minutes and 59.4 seconds. 16 other people did it within 3 years. So we went through the entire human race up until this point with nobody breaking the 4-minute mile. But once one person did, it became a feat that many people could do. And what Bannister essentially said in his memoirs was why was this so important for him was that it was not the physical preparation that was important so much as it was the mental preparation. And spending time preparing himself and breaking down or shifting his mindset from thinking about the 4-minute mile was not possible to break to something that he could do. And that was where he spent most of his time, was really in thinking about and preparing himself mentally to break that 4-minute mile. So just before we go on, I want to take another minute here and have you in the chat box tell us what mindsets are getting in the way of your scaling efforts. Institutional and systematic roadblocks, academic freedom. That's the way we've always done it. Yeah, absolutely. Faculty complacency, inertia. We've always done it that way. No one in my family has done this. Money, oh, that's a big one, right? Prove to me that what you want works. Faculty complacency was the best answer. Siloed efforts, inertia, and general conservative approach to education. All great examples of things that do get in our way. And a lot of times it's because people are skeptical of what's going on around them, or they may be not thinking differently about what actually might be transforming the way in which they work. And so I'll turn here to Einstein for a bit of inspiration. But essentially, right, today's problems can't be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. And so this is something I think within SUNY and roles I've had in sort of leading systematic change across system that we've really tried to help people see the world from a different perspective. And for example, when we come to systems, and those of you who've heard me talk before, we talk a lot about thinking differently about systems. And historically, right, systems have had this role of being a regulator, an allocator, or a coordinator. They have been set up by the government to essentially serve as a state agency to do these things. And that has really created a dynamic of tension oftentimes between the system office and the campuses that they're trying to work with. And often it's over disagreements or power over fighting over authority and autonomy and funding. And it stops us from thinking about what role might systems play if we really think about the role of a system as somebody that's there to help the campus be more successful, help the students really be more successful, and how we might actually work together to leverage resources collectively in a different way. But we've got to stop thinking about systems just as regulators, allocators, coordinators. And in my mind, we really need to think about them more as conveners, as goal setters, facilitators, and visionaries. One of the words we're using increasingly is facilitative leadership, that the role of the system is increasingly to facilitate efforts across multiple campuses and help those campuses to be successful in their own right, but to sort of bring them together in a way that helps them take charge of initiatives and move them forward, and does not be operating individually or on their own islands. In some ways, you might think about system-wide priorities being cross-cutting efforts that cut across all these campuses. But you want to get away from the idea that campus and systems are doing the same thing, but think about where do systems add value to what campuses. And so in many ways, the mindsets that we have really trap us in certain mental prisons in the way we think about things. Another example of this is student transfer. I think for many, we get caught in this mindset that transfer is about a small number of students who are moving vertically through higher education. Typically, they're going to move from a community college to a four-year institution. Within SUNY, this was something that I think guided our thinking for decades. And all the way back around 1980, we actually put a policy in place where we mandated all new degree programs have articulation agreements, at least 2 articulation agreements with another program, so that we could begin to put in place a structure for students to move between these programs, and mostly in a very vertical sort of way. Now, one of the problems we've got to now is SUNY has 5,000 undergraduate programs, so that's a heck of a lot of articulation agreements, and those articulation agreements don't often look alike, and so it creates a confusion for students. And we really know that transfer really looks more like this, right? Students trying to navigate a very complicated system on their way to achieving whatever goal it is that they have. And so it wasn't until we took a step back and looked at the data that we really began to realize the way we viewed transfer was very different than how students were actually engaging in transfer. And so when we ran the data, what we began to realize, these are some of the insights, I won't walk through all of them, but we had more than 30,000 transfers a year within a system. That is larger than almost any of our campuses in terms of enrollments. That nearly 50% of all of our baccalaureate students or graduates had attended at least 2 institutions along the way. There were lots of credits being lost, that our transfer students were taking longer than we would expect them to graduate. There were students transferring in all different directions. I'll talk about that in a minute. And sometimes it was actually easier to transfer to a private institution outside of SUNY than it was to stay within SUNY. And so that really got us thinking about, well, we need to think differently about ways in which students actually transfer. And one of those things we thought about was then we looked at mobility. And we thought about mobility, understanding how they were actually flowing through our system. And what we realized was that students, a third of our transfer students were actually transferring to a community college. And we weren't anywhere near prepared for that sort of mobility. And so we started thinking differently, right? We stopped organizing ourselves around how institutions actually operated, which is where we create a lot of policy. We actually began to shift our mindset to think about, how do students actually experience higher education? And how do you create a policy that facilitates the student experience, which is often different than what you might think about from just an institutional perspective? And as we saw these students swirling, we knew we had to put in place a framework that actually helped them be successful. And essentially, one of the things we stopped asking was, why are students failing? And we started asking, how are we failing the students? And so then from that, we launched Seamless Transfer. And for us, we think it was the first ever multi-directional transfer framework that really covers 95% of all of our students. And I can walk you through all the rest of that. But we put in place a framework that tried to make transfer more coherent, both for the institution, but in particular for the student, and create a set of policies that were really driving and supporting student transfer in a different way than we ever had before. But we couldn't do that if we had the same mindset that we'd always had, which was this small number of students moving vertically through the system. We had to realize that students were actually swirling, and we had lots of them swirling through different types of institutions. And so after that, of course, everything was successful and everybody was happy, and all was good with the rest of the world. And another time I'd be happy to talk through some of the obstacles, but it's all about mindset shifting. And why we're bringing this into data is it is the data that really helps us see the world from a different way. It helps us shift mindsets, but more importantly, getting back to some of the obstacles and the experience that we had, because faculty were so intimately engaged in this transfer reimagining that we undertook here at SUNY, was that the data helped get the faculty on board and help them understand why what we were doing was to help students be more successful, and why their involvement in it was important. So with that, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to turn it over now to Robert at University System of Georgia, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Robert, I'll let you share yours. And I'll take you
All
off.
right, Jason, thank you. I'm going to pop mine open, PowerPoint open. Let's see. Are you seeing my PowerPoint here, Jason?
We are not.
Okay, let's try this again. Share screen again. There we go. Let's try that.
Yep. We
Looking
can
better,
see
I
the
think.
whole screen though.
There you go.
There we go.
How's that? Okay, we're there. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate being here today. I'm also joined, so you know, by one of my colleagues here, Rachana Bhatt, who is a director and manager of information research activities here at the University System of Georgia. And Rachana is going to help jump in and keep us apprised of the data side of things. Also, I want to say right off the bat, as you see the PowerPoint here, that I have borrowed a presentation because my PowerPoint presentations tend to be a little bit dull. So I actually got my boss, Tristan Denley, to let me use one of his and do a little bit of tweaking to it. So that's why you see Tristan's name here on the slide. He is with us in spirit, if not in body at the moment. So we're going to talk a little bit about data for scaling and how it relates to our momentum plan here at USG. And then also, as was discussed just a moment ago, the TS3, Taking Student Success to Scale project that we are very happy to be working on. Our project is called Georgia Equity Through High Impact Practices. And this is two-year funding that is designed to help us close equity gaps in high impact practices, scaled across the state, and actually beyond that, scaled so that it can be used by others beyond the state. And that's our true goal. These HIPs are embedded intentionally into guided pathways for success models. So as I go through this presentation, you'll see a little bit about the GPS focus and about the specific HIPs that we are addressing. Just quickly about the project itself, though, we're thrilled to be a part of the overall TS3 group that is doing this work. We are focusing on equity issues as they track through HIPs in GPS, and most particularly, as I bolded here, intentionally embedded into GPS practices. And we got here to begin the data discussion. We got here because data told us we needed to do it. And I'll have a slide in a bit that'll talk a little bit about that. Our work is with 6 Vanguard institutions. I believe I have a couple of those folks that are on here now. And just because of that, I'd like to say we have Georgia College and State University, Georgia Gwinnett College, Georgia State University, Savannah State University, University of Georgia, and the University of West Georgia. So I want to thank you, all of you who are here on the current webinar. These 6 Vanguard institutions are helping us establish the ways in which the HIPs can be intentionally embedded, both for curricular and for co-curricular guided pathways. And we're building on existing system-wide work that has been done through our Complete College Georgia initiative. Some of you may be familiar, I'm sure most of you are, with Complete College America. So if you're not familiar with Complete College Georgia, understand that we have many of the same goals, and that will help put that into perspective. We've had a Complete College Georgia initiative for the last 6 years that has been dictated by our governor as a statewide initiative. And that work is what we're building on now for what we call the overall momentum plan. And one reason I'm focusing on that is that as we do all of this work, the HIPs and the guided pathways and the data scaling work that we are now focusing upon, we've realized that it's imperative to keep the message coherent for the faculty and administrators, and even for the students as well, who want to see one direction and understand what they're actually doing. And this is part of the mindset work. And that's where I'm going next, because a part of what we're doing is mindset research. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. I appreciate Jason for already beginning that discussion. We're going to, in our TS3 work for HIPs, we are hoping to do hopefully a novel job of incorporating our mindset research into our Taking Student Success to Scale project. So having said that, let me move us on to the next slide. So part of what we're doing here is very clearly creating clear degree pathways to success. Trying to eliminate the kind of thing. I love the slide Jason showed a bit ago that was the Candyland, basically the Candyland slide, because that's what we don't want. We don't want that twisting, colorful board game, the chutes and ladders, whatever that takes you on a wild ride. We want to create clear degree pathways to success, spelled out for students, spelled out for the faculty, and for students who do not know exactly what they're doing when they first come on campus, perhaps. And data, we want to know what data says about these pathways, how data tells us that we need to structure them, and where we need to focus our energies on pathways so that we can reach the students who are the most in need and create equity, which is the most important part of our TS3 work on HIPs and is essential for our momentum plan as well. This would allow us to bring students who are first generation, for example, or underrepresented, or students with racial or ethnic makeup that traditionally has created a barrier for understanding how to thread the way through post-secondary education. So the data is helping us do this in a number of ways, and it's helping us figure out where we embed those high-impact practices most intentionally to get the biggest bang for the buck. So where do these practices actually have to be so that we're impacting the most number of students who really need that assistance? Part of this is creating architected program choice. So again, you avoid that chutes and ladders effect that we saw earlier, and students have clear and reasonable choices to make when they appear at a university, actually before they come to school. so that they are able to make choices that are wise and are going to help them complete on time and complete with a degree or certificate that is of worth to them, and hopefully without doing it with lost credits, so that they find themselves trying to pay for this with the issues of debt in the future. So one of the issues there around an architected type of choice is this. You'll see here several bubbles with different academic areas, and these we often think of as academic focus areas. Some would see them as meta majors, but either way, the terminology, it's the same thing. These are places where students can choose to focus their energies when they enter the university system. You'll notice there's this one big standout in the middle. It's white. It doesn't seem to belong there among the others. Her nice little color palette. This is undecided. And this is something that we have discovered through reasonable and long-term use of our data is a bugbear for our students. And that's why it's here in this big, unpleasant white with the black undecided to give a kind of an ugly contrast. This is where too many of the students have ended up. And we've seen this over data that's been collected through research and policy here at the university system, as well as Complete College Georgia over the last several years. What we're doing now is taking that away. Now, see, that's a much more attractive picture, I think. And part of the momentum plan that we now are implementing requires the architected choice for students so that they can make a purposeful program choice, pursue their studies with the understanding of what they're going to do. From the beginning, they can change. Students may decide that a meta major of STEM or of education is not the right one for them, but at least they have somewhere to begin that hopefully will allow them to work productively and not to waste their time. So that leads us into the next part of academic mindset. We discovered while working on the momentum year, and I'm going to wrap that up in a moment to tell you what all the pieces are, that the productive academic mindset was critical. And Jason gave us a little intro to that, but what we are focusing upon now for academic mindset for students is that they have a perceived purpose of coursework. They know why they're doing what they're doing. They feel connected to their institution and that they belong to the institution. They're in the right place. They believe they're capable of learning the material. Just like someone may be capable of breaking that 4-minute mile, they believe they're capable of learning the material and getting a degree. They have confidence interacting with faculty and staff, and they show overall a grit and a perseverance. So none of that will surprise particularly, but the mindset research itself is important for our ongoing momentum plan, and so much that, speaking of specifically of data for scaling, I want to use this as an example. We are beginning our mindset work for the second year. We actually have created, with the Motivate Lab at the University of Virginia, we have created a survey that has gone out to students throughout the state, trying in the first year to reach all incoming freshmen. In the second year, we are going to do a better job of that. In the third and the fourth years, et cetera, going on. So this mindset research is going to be given to incoming freshmen, survey, but sometime between the spring and their entry into school in August, within the second week of their entry into school. And then it will be given again, it's pre and post survey research at the end of that semester. That will be repeated next fall, and then next fall, of course, with iterative changes, as you can imagine. So with the Motivate Lab, we're working to make this survey effective, to help us filter out the background noise that simply occurs being a new student anywhere, for example, and see how students have mindsets that change and grow and help with all of these points that you see in front of you at the moment. So we're trying also to link these to student outcome measures and the embedded HIPs that we are placing into the guided pathways. So as one example, as I move along, this is a place that we are using data, surveys and research to help us scale the mindset research and and its impact on the momentum year coming up. So this momentum plan in general, including all those pieces, the gist of it is that the students come in to their programs and they plan to take at least 30 credits in their first year, and that they will use the credit intensity here to push them along and create momentum, thus the name. The slide I have in front of you is a piece of research that helped us get started, or the results of it that helped us get started on momentum year. This is from the Tennessee Board of Regents. They were on the last slides, so now they're back here again. So Tennessee is with us today, I can see. And this gives you an example of why we have implemented the momentum year. So with some research from the Tennessee Board of Regents that Tristan Denley brought with him here to our system, you can see the difference in additional credits earned for community college and university students, and the probabilities of degree attainments, which go up significantly for students who take at least 30 credits in the first year, tuition and fees per degrees, how they decrease, expenditures per degree, how they decrease with those who are taking 30 credits in the first year, and tuition and fees average. This is research by Belfield, Jenkins, and Larb from 2016. I urge you to look up if you would like to know a little bit more about it. But the reason I included here is that this was a piece of important research for us to get buy-in, both from faculty and administrators as we began the momentum year. And as we continue the momentum year, it's becoming more obvious all the time that, yes, this data is showing we're probably on the right track here. A critical part of this is math pathways, which was already mentioned earlier. Math can often be either a momentum booster, or it can be, in many ways, the graveyard of dreams for students who want to get their university degrees. Students will begin work unprepared for math. They hit their college algebra, for example. Even if they're not going into calculus or to another STEM, to a STEM-related degree that might require it, they hit college algebra and they often stop, fail, fall out. And we can see that research as we look at our results through Georgia through the previous decades. Focus and purpose is critical to making the momentum plan work. And here's one way we do that, using some data to assist us in creating focus and purpose. Back to math again. This is a graph that is an undergraduate transcript visual. So the concept here is each of those little bubbles that you see is a course. It's somewhere in the university that students are taking. Some of them are far away from the center and very small. Some of them are in the middle here and are very large. And the darker they get, the greater impact they appear to have upon student success and graduation. You'll notice a couple here that are really large and dark. These are freshman English and gateway math courses that are right here at the center of the bubble. So there's where our math pathways come into effect. And how did we come at this concept that they are important? Well, amongst other things, we looked at graduation over time, completion of students, and hopefully this little animated chart will work here with our Zoom broadcast. So you'll see here graduates at the top, and you'll watch this change at the upper left as we go through semesters. We're in semester 1 right now. 10,000 USG students, data that we have pulled together from them over the years. 2,500 have either completed their first credit-bearing math and or writing class, or completed neither during their first academic year. So over here on the left, the neither English nor math in red, then only English, then only math, and then far over to the right, both English and math. Now watch as I animate this, what happens to the completion as we move through semesters. We're in semester 1, semester 2, semester 3, 4. Pretty soon we'll see in the upper left hand a few graduations beginning to happen. Semester 6, semester 8. Now you see a few graduations at the top, and you see there are those who have finished both their English and math and completed those gateway courses. all the way up through semester 12, and they're a great difference in the students who actually completed those Gateway English and Math courses as opposed to those far on the left who neither completed the Gateway English nor the Math. Rachna, do you have any comments on this one you would like to share with us?
Well, I think it just illustrates the importance of data and looking at this not only in an aggregate picture, as Robert showed here, but also disaggregated. We broke this down by different aspects of students' race, gender, sector that they are part of, Pell status, to try and get at, to make sure that this is something that we are seeing, not just for students as a whole, but for individual groups. And that really highlights the equity sort of concern that we have with our high impact practices and our momentum year. We definitely have a focus on that as an area for us.
Excellent. I'm glad you said that, because the disaggregation of this data is critical to the equity issues that as we move forward. And then here, a little easier to see on a graph, but very helpful, I think. This is a comparison of success in Gateway Math classes specifically from 2013, traditional learning support, the little blue, if you can see the colors, that's the far left piece that's a relatively small in each year, according to each math subscore. And then 2015, our foundations courses, 2016 foundations, and then on the right, our co-requisite for 2015 and 2016. And what you'll see here by ACT Math subscore is that regardless of the ACT Math subscore, the students who had co-requisite remediation did extraordinarily better than those who had the old traditional learning support or foundations. This chart, I think, is a very telling one for those who wanted to resist some changes in Gateway Math courses, and has helped them understand why it's important to move forward on the pathways that we are now taking with co-requisite remediation. And I realize I'm just about out of time here, so let me speed up a bit. This one's a little complicated. I want to point out how far we can go with this data, though, and that's why I like this chart. This is a chart of critical courses, benchmark grades, and the impact of deeper learning. This is one course at one institution, Kennesaw State University, Political Science 1101, American Government. And that's that dark kind of circle you see over to the right, fairly large. It's high on what you see as the student enrollment impact, which is our x-axis. And it's relatively high on our deeper course learning impact, which is our y-axis. These courses, you can see the percentages on the far left. Here we're trying to measure courses. One impact they have on student enrollment and on deeper course learning, and one impact they may have on students going on to completion. So on the far right, you will see that these students have gone forward to increase their graduation probabilities if they scored well in Political Science 1101 and received an A. If these students got an F in Political Science 1101 at Kennesaw State University, then their percentage chance of graduation appears to be rather low. This is from data we have gathered from institutions over time. And then you'll see graduation rates at the far right-hand low. It's kind of probably a bit hard to see here. But the gist is that from a course, a critical course, early on that students may take, whether it's Gateway Math, English, or in this case, Political Science, the grade that students make in this course seems to have a relatively high predictive ability for student success. This is how we are beginning our work on embedding high impact practices in specific courses. We want to embed those practices in the courses that we know have a tremendous impact for students and their graduation and completion. So since I know I'm about to run out of time here, here is our brownie. Here's our most famous slide. This is the USG Momentum Year in a nutshell. We are making a purposeful program, helping students make a purposeful program choice, creating a productive academic mindset, attempting the first 30 hours in a clear pathway, attempting 9 hours in an academic focus area, and completing the initial English and math. And the reason it's a brownie, I'm stealing this from Tristan Denley because I cannot improve upon it, is that it's not a menu, it's a recipe. All of these things have to be present in order to succeed as well as possible. And therefore, if you leave something out, like the sugar, you're going to realize your brownie is no good. But we're also looking, using data as our keystone, at coherency without uniformity. We want to honor the institutions and their traditions and their student populations and their identities as institutions. So therefore, we realize there can be many types of brownies. You know, you may have brownies with pistachios. You may have brownies with almonds. Whatever. They can all be good. There is our coherency without uniformity. And in short, we have a analysis, modeling, planning, action, key metrics and reporting, iterative chart here that helps us to create the network improvement communities we need to make this work, just like we need our 6 Vanguard institutions for our TS3 HIPs work that we are now doing over time. So I'll let this go for the moment and hand it back to Claire.
Thank you so much, Robert and Jason. I'm sure that has raised many questions and got people thinking about many things, both on your campus and from the Georgia and SUNY presentations. So if people would like to type in their questions, I will feed them back. If you have specific questions for either Robert or Jason, please indicate that. If they're general questions, we'll just field them that way.
While we're waiting on that, one of the things I just want to pick up on that Robert talked about was that critical course piece, Robert, which that slide always is fascinating to look at. To me, one of the things that's a great takeaway is it moves us beyond thinking just about DFWs and thinking about other grades. And one of the examples you had there were students were getting C's in a course, so they're passing, but their likelihood of going on to succeed was very, very low. And
Exactly.
I think that data really helps us shift our mindset around thinking differently about grading, right? It's more than just, it's pushing beyond just the D's, the F's, and the W's.
Precisely, and that's one reason why I wish I'd had time to do justice. It's also a little hard to see, but as we try to understand which courses have to be the critical either momentum boosters or stumbling blocks on the pathways, and for our high impact practices, it's this kind of thing that's going to do it for us.
We can also take comments. You know, it's hard to have an actual conversation, but if people would like to discuss the data that they either have or wish they had on their own campus, we can try to have, you know, something of a conversation. I can verbalize your comments for you. Jason, were you going to say something?
Well, while we're on this slide and while we're waiting on comments, the other piece I really like about this is this concept of deeper learning, which I've had the conversation with Tristan a couple of times on, but really thinking through, it's not just about making sure students get A's or B's, right? But it's about redesigning our courses in a way that helps them be more successful and learn more, right? Which is, I think, the idea behind the deeper learning in this slide is, you know, how do we make sure students are engaging in a different way in the material so that they're getting the knowledge and the skills, the learning to earn an A or B, and that is really what is going to lead them to be more successful down the road. And that's why HIPs become so important in this case.
HIPs, and if you think to their mindset, because if they do succeed well early on in these courses, then you're probably, and we suspect, this is our hypothesis as we do this mindset work, we expect in the post survey that we're going to see a change.
So someone asks, Robert, could you talk about your approach to beginning the high impact practices implementation in the Vanguard institution and then moving to other institutions? So I think focusing sort of on your scaling approach, you know, starting with a core or a pilot group, and then how you'll scale that throughout your, is it 26 or 23 institutions? Sorry.
Well, it's 26.
Is it 24? Okay, so I just in the middle of what I had, institution.
It's 26, but because we consolidation happening. I understand that. We have trouble keeping it that track as well.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So the Vanguard institutions that I named here are they're the institutions that are going to help us make this really happen. We could talk about the theory. These guys are actually going to implement and are implementing with us. Let me tell you how it's beginning. That might help. So per the conference we had in Los Angeles 2 weeks ago, the Vanguard institutions are creating campus plans for implementation of these equitable HIPs and ways to increase equity on their campuses with high impact practices. They filled these out, completed them. They're editing them now. They've come back with some feedback from you, from us here at the system as well, and they're improving them. But in addition, at the same time this is happening, we're working on our taxonomies. And there are individuals that are parts of those Vanguard institutions that are working with us at the institution, at the USG right now, to create our taxonomies for HIPs. And we're starting with the service learning and study abroad, high impact practices, and then we're moving down from there, others that are being implemented here in the state. The focus on the taxonomies is creating something that is coherent, again, without enforcing uniformity, but has coherency, allows us to do some evaluation and analysis of the success of the HIPs in a way that can be compared between institutions and outside of them, and hopefully also gives us a very clear path of how we can have those HIPs given the stamp of approval by everyone who needs to do so. So for example, the VPAAs, VPSAs, and then the registrar's office likely. That's what we're working on now. So that whole plan is in the works, and that's how we are beginning to start here with our HIPs work. I see there's another question though, so maybe I'll let that one go for the moment.
Okay, someone asks, how do you determine coherence versus uniformity? Through a rubric, through taxonomy?
The answer is yes. Actually, it's both rubrics and taxonomies really, because it would depend. I use that as sort of a mantra, coherence without uniformity. So it would depend on the situation. In the case of HIPs, it's going to be through the taxonomies we're creating. We want to see coherence so that if we're working on study abroad in one institution, we can look at results there versus another institution. But if you think of you may not know enough about our individual institutions to know that the list I gave earlier is as broad as it can be between research institutions, comprehensive state institutions. One size does not fit all. So I'll give you one example here that an institution we're working with has a great deal of data on race and ethnicity and high impact practices that they are ready to give us. They're looking forward to doing this in a better way. Another one has better data on rural versus urban students and first generation versus students who are not first generation. And that's what I mean when I say not uniformity, because we're not going to shoehorn them into doing the same thing. We want to know how they make sense as a coherent set of taxonomies, but we're not going to try to do exactly the same work in each institution. It wouldn't help. Go ahead. I just noticed somebody wanted to see the brownie slide again, so if you don't mind, I'll share that and do it again while we're talking. Keep going, Jason.
Go for it, yeah. No, I was going to say, one of the things to consider for systems versus campuses and all of this is what levers you might be able to pull as a system to move campuses forward and making some of this happen. An advantage systems do have as governing boards are an ability to create policy that can move or force a move in certain directions. You always want to be careful about that because you can create a great deal of pushback if you do it in a unproductive way. But I think, part of it is creating a policy environment that incentivizes institutions to move a certain direction, provides a broad framework and how to move, sort of like USG Momentum here is a broad framework that institutions can work in, but they can then put their pistachios on, or their chocolate chips, or their ice cream, or whatever their add-ons might be. SUNY did the same thing with transfer. We create a broad framework for what our transfer framework would look like, but institutions in many cases could individualize that to their particular situations. But in both these cases, the expectation was the campus was doing the bigger picture, momentum year or transfer, for example.
And so that helps speak to some of the comments earlier about faculty and making it internally motivated rather than making it externally imposed. So that's
absolutely. I think for us, one of the big shifts that we had in our mindset as we pitched transfer, and as I've heard Robert talk here, was really focusing on the student success aspect of this. A lot of the pushback that we would get would be around issues of workload, relevancy, academic freedom. And we just kept hammering on the reason we were doing this is for student success. And we would roll the evidence out, right? We'd bring the data out the way Robert did to show this is why we're doing it. This is why we really feel this is in the best interest of the students. Mm-hmm. And the more we focused on the student success argument, the harder it was for the other arguments to catch hold and to delay implementation. So I think the more you can it's not about engaging in those other arguments, it's just keeping the focus on the student success piece of all this.
Yeah, that was interesting. If you looked at the comments, there was only one that really even sort of tangentially discussed sort of how students might fit into the mix. So I think that's a really important piece to keep in this, even when you're talking about big sort of organizational structures, that doesn't get lost. Because that moral argument, it's harder to turn away from, right? It's a harder one.
Yep, absolutely. And particularly when you have data to support that argument, that this really does help students, and this is why we're doing these sorts of policy initiatives. It makes it much harder for others to push back against.
Yeah, it ties it together. So we're not getting very many. I don't at least have any questions. It looks like, Robert, you had one that must have come to you privately. So unless either of you have something that came to your private chat feed, there's nothing in the public chat feed. And I think that was a really nice endpoint tying together, the reason everyone is here with the data and the system scaling. So if you maybe would each have some final thoughts, we can just wrap up a few minutes early.
Robert, go for it.
Okay. Final thoughts. You said something about stitching it all together, and I think that's what this is all about. So that's one issue. That's one reason that we're particularly excited to do the HIPs work that we're doing now, because we believe this will help stitch together all of this so that everyone sees the momentum. And of course, everything was there on the brownie. The work we did at Complete College Georgia helped stitch it together so that we didn't feel like we were necessarily doing 100 initiatives. We probably still feel like we're doing too many, and we're trying to fix that now, especially for the sake of the faculty who want to see what the highway looks like and not all the tributaries coming off of it. But we're trying to use this all to stitch together a coherent idea of where we're going, and I appreciate you all giving us the chance to hear from you and to talk about it again.
Yeah, just two final thoughts that pop into mind is, one is that there is light on the other end of all of this, and when you achieve it, it's great. And an example is, I didn't give a lot of details about our transfer work, but one aspect of that was engaging the faculty and creating the transfer paths that were multi-directional. And there was a lot of pushback at first from faculty, but eventually we got them in the room and we got the conversations going. When we knew we had reached success was when faculty from disciplines and other transfer paths were coming to us and asking us for help in creating new transfer paths. They wanted to do the work. They saw the excitement around it and the benefit of it. we knew that we had created a mindset shift in that case. The other is, I think we're all struck with this issue of initiative fatigue. And that's one reason why I really like what USG is doing with the Momentum Year is, as Robert talked about, stitching it all together. It does help bring more coherence, I think, to a lot of the work that's happening across many systems. And while it doesn't completely alleviate all of the initiative fatigue, I think it does help the faculty and the staff better understand how it all works together and why it's important. And the brownie is such an important analogy because it isn't about just picking and choosing. It really is, all these pieces are important for supporting students to be successful. So it's go out there and build your brownies, bake your brownies.
All right, well, on that note, everyone probably is going to go to the supermarket and buy some chocolate and eggs and sugar and butter. So thank you so much to Robert and Jason. I think this was a really great first TS3 High Impact Practices webinar. Again, I hope that you will join us on May 1st at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for our Guided Pathways webinar. And I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Jason will sign us off now.